Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a story, a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, on Twitch and YouTube. And if you want to listen to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 61 of Stepping Wild. Tibs crouched, looking the room over. As he sensed, it was bare except for the wooden discs, ranging from a couple of steps across to up to 8 or 9, set in the dirt. Set in the dirt floor, pushing his hand against the ground. Against the ground, to easily sink, and resisted. You know what? Caused it to sink. And resisted when he pulled it out, but it emerged clean. It wasn't mud, but it behaved like it. What he sensed of the essence told him little of what to expect, other than it was connected to the discs. The closest one was within reach, so he placed a hand on it and pushed it down. Immediately, essence congregated under it and pushed back. He couldn't know how much weight it supported without stepping onto it, and he expected that was the point. Even with sensing essence, the runner might think the only test here was to jump from disc to disc before they sunk and dragged him down. He started asking, then stopped. Stu would have enjoyed the conversation, and Tibs might have been able to get him to let details out about the room slip. Furman would see it for what it was. Mirka would shut down any conversation about the room. The mud was easily twice his height in depth, and without using essence, Tim didn't know if he'd be able to pull himself out once he fell in. If he were able to suffuse himself, it would let him bypass the rules about using essence and let him make it across regardless of what the essence in the floor did. He also thought that taking hold of the earth essence in the floor to keep it solid wasn't technically using essence, but after the recent exchange, if Furman disagreed, it would bring this run to an end, and Tibs would have to decide how far he was willing to go to rescue the woman's man. He stood. And where was the fun in outright bypassing the test? He finally had the chance to do a run. He wasn't going to take the easy way through. He placed his foot on the disc and slowly shifted his weight. The essence adjusted, but not enough to keep it from tipping. So he extended and moved his foot to the center, and it shifted evenly, supporting his weight. The change, as he leaned to the side, was slow enough he didn't have to worry about a sudden tip over. At least for this disc. He now had options. 7 discs form a relative straight line to the other side. They were spaced so that at worst, someone unused to jumping might land on the edge and quickly have to move to the center, if that disc acted like the one he stood on. The easy path, by all appearances. How do you know how far people can jump? He cursed his curiosity. You think we're going to help you? Mirka replied mockingly. No, I'd even told myself not to bother, but it slipped out. It's been a long time since my curiosity has been piqued like this. Don't feel like you need to answer me anytime I blurt out a question. Why does this feel like you're trying to trick me? Furman asked. You asked a question, tell me not to answer, and yet I feel like I should. Tibbs looked up from examining the position of the other discs. Maybe you miss having someone else to talk with? Hey, Furman speaks with me all the time. We don't need something like you here to listen to liven things up. He shrugged and returned to studying the room. If he avoided the direct path, the distance between discs would make it circuitous, and each added disc came with an opportunity for Furman to have trapped it in a way he couldn't guess. But they all had one conveniently close, should he have to hurry off. Stretching to the next closest disc, since he wasn't using the direct path, he could only place his foot on the edge and the essence concentrated there to push back. He couldn't tell if the essence would act predictably until he was on it. He pulled his foot back and hopped over, landing off center, and had to quickly move as the disc wobble was more pronounced until it settled and supported his weight evenly. You cheated, Mirka grumbled. I just know it. Understanding how a puzzle works isn't cheating. He looked around for the next step. It's not even being sneaky. It's just thinking a problem through. It's why us thieves are the ones to deal with the traps and puzzles in a dungeon. Rogues, they replied with derision. No one ever told me anything about thieves being allowed in. I would really like to know how it is dungeons use the same terms the guild came up with, he mused. I'm sure you would, Mirka said. Don't count on me to be the one telling you. Would they even know? From the conversation with Stowe and Ganny, from what he remembered. From what he remembered of the conversation with Stowe and Ganny, if they talked about, she hadn't been told what she needed. She'd been told what she needed to help Stowe in being a dungeon. He didn't. Okay, so I actually don't need that because I have it here. Yeah. From the conversation with Stowe and Ganny, she'd been told what she needed to help Stowe in being a dungeon. He didn't remember if they talked about everything that meant, but he doubted how terms had been decided on would matter. He could explain some of it with information Stowe had absorbed when runners died, but he was the first person with knowledge of the guild Furman had encountered. Some dungeons could speak to each other, so it was possible information spread that way. But neither Mirka nor Furman had given indication they'd been contacted. And dungeons needed to be old to manage it. With only one floor, Furman couldn't be that old. He wished there was a city close by. It would have been interesting to read what scholars guessed at between runs. He picked the next one because it was an easy jump and landed in its center, only for the disc to tip as the essence moved only to one side. Moved only to one side. He jumped again, bypassing the one he could step to for the obvious trap that it was, and landed at the disc on that disc's edge, having overshot the center in his rush. He slipped and landed on his back, a foot in the mud, and hurried to roll and grab onto the edge, his face nearly ending up in the mud as the disc settled. He panted, his heart racing as he pulled his foot out. He sat in the disc center and laughed. A room on the first floor had nearly gotten him. There's definitely something wrong with it, Mirka said. And it wasn't because he'd been overconfident, or because Furman had cheated. For all its simplicity, the trap was a good one because he couldn't know ahead of time how the essence would react to his weight. He had misjudged one aspect in thinking the center would automatically be stable. He sensed as he shifted his weight, and once he knew which side was better at supporting his weight, used it to get to his feet. Of course, Furman said, annoyed, you can sense what's under you. Tibs laughed again. And it's not helping me. I've got to know, did you change how the room's set up because of me? Didn't you sense the changes I made? He shook his head. I sensed that you made changes, but I wasn't paying attention. Other than the maze's layout, I have no idea what you changed. That's cheating, Mirka yelled. Leave it be. Furman replied. We knew he could do that by the time I agreed to him. I agreed to let him do the run. I am curious though. Why do you say that being able to sense what's under you doesn't help? It only reacts once I've landed on the disc. I can only test those close by, and I already figured out they were traps. Once I jumped on this disc, I was too busy not falling off to sense what happened. I don't trust it. It's too willing to answer. Merca. Tibbs barely kept his annoyance under control. My curiosity runs as deep as my reserves. It's become harder to get answers from people as I age and stop looking like a child. So, short of a question that I think will end up hurting me, I'm going to satisfy Furman, or yours, curiosity. I don't believe you, he shrugged. That's on you. He picked his nest disc as well as more around it in preparation for it being a trap. He jumped, then leaped off as it sunk as if it was in water. Then he was stepping around where he landed to keep that disc from tipping. He was laughing again, hands on knees, panting once the disc had settled. He straightened and looked the way he'd come. He was nowhere close to the halfway point, but he was tempted to go back and test each disc until he knew how they all behaved. But he could do that on his next run. For this one, he had a teammate to rescue. The nest disc could have been set on stone for how little it moved. The next one almost had him fall in as it tipped over under his fall as it tipped up under his feet and forced him to make a blind jump. Then two more before a bit of tiptoeing had him hand on knees, laughing. I think you're right. There is something not quite right with him. This is fun. The disc nearly tipped again as Tibs got to his feet. It's not meant to be fun, Furman protested. It's meant to push you, kill you if you fail. He laughed again. Those of us who survive the runs, we get to liking this. To test ourselves against someone like you. We know we can die, he scoffed. It's what makes surviving so exhilarating. He sighed. I miss this. With a few breaths, he'd settled himself. With a few breaths. Breathe. Okay, why do you not? Yeah. Oh, okay. With a few breaths, he settled himself and jumped to the nest disc. This time, he nearly fell forward, ready for it to move when it didn't. 4 jumps after that, and a near fall, Tibbs landed on the other side. Can I ask a question? Furman asked. Of course. Why didn't you take the central path? Tibbs chuckled. Too obvious. It looked like the path you wanted me to take. So there's no point in me doing that. No one will fall for its trap. I'm not saying that. He considered how to explain it. I made it to Stowe's 4th floor. I've learned some of how he thinks. I saw that path, and I knew it would be something he'd do on his first or 2nd floor. The only ones who won't fall for it are those who survived that room, and runners who have been through enough of a dungeon to know to expect something like that. Why are you telling us that? Murka sounded about to panic. Furman's going to use that so he won't waste time making the room any harder than it already is. I told you. Unless I think it's going to hurt me, I am going to answer. Out of curiosity, you have one of the discs in the center path set to pull down in the mud, right? When the answer came, it was uncertain. Yes. How do you know? Tibs chuckled. I told you. I've been through a lot of runs. Keep that one there, by the way. Why are you telling me that? They asked. It's going to kill those who take it. Shouldn't you care what happens to other runner? It's not certain to kill anyone. Fast reflexes can save a runner, and they'll have a team, so falling in the mud doesn't mean they'll die. But it's a lesson about taking the easy way. He headed into the corridor. That's rarely the right decision, in or out of dungeons. The room with the man was in sight when the creature stepped out of the tree. He was reluctant to call this one a woodling because it was taller than him and with the massive build of a fighter. He formed his sword and shield and readied himself. It had a lot of essence, but it was all life, so no special ability. Other than being in a corridor, it had the sense of a first floor boss, especially with his gold behind it and how it waited for him to approach. He rushed it, coating his leg with water to slide under its attempt to grab him and slice at its leg. And you know what? At the leg. There's a lot of it in there that I can't really remove, so I'll remove this one. All that resulted was a bit of bark flying off. It would be tough. He brought up his shield with a curse, and the wood fighter's kick that impacted it sent him sliding almost to the door of his destination. What? Almost to the door of his destination? You know what? I don't need this because there's only a door. Almost to the door. Fast as well. It was already running at him as Tibs got to his feet. He coated his arm with earth, but kept himself from using metal to add sharpness to his sword. If it came to an argument, he could justify that, technically. Coating himself wasn't making use of essence. The added edge couldn't fall under that. This time, when the shield took the fist's impact, he only slid a few paces. His return slash bit deep with the added strength. He attacked again, and the wood fighter caught the blade in his hand, some bark chipping off, and then snapped it into two. The following blow sent Tibs into a tree with enough strength his sight blurred. He ducked as the indistinct form rushed forward and shoved himself away from the wall, chastising himself for being surprised at the unexpected action. He reformed his sword as his vision cleared and focused on not getting hit. There's an H here. As he studied how the wood creature moved, he noticed a fluidity that made him wonder if Fearman was controlling it directly. It hadn't been until the third or fourth floor Stowe had mastered. Stowe had mastered that, but without runners to distract them. Maybe possessing its creatures had been a way to pass the time. He dodged another rush. He couldn't see a strategy beyond attempting to grab him. He ducked and slashed. Pale wood was exposed this time, but the sap that leaked out of it turned opaque and then was bark. So it could heal, after a fashion. This would still cost it. Actually, no. This would still cost life essence. And it had to be limited, even if it hadn't been enough for Tibs to sense the expense. He ducked. He'd have to work out the rules. He planted his sword in the creature's exposed front and stepped away, leaving it there. He almost had it explode, but that would break the agreement. He recalled his broken sword's essence and absorbed it. Before you complain, Merca, he ducked under the creature's swing. I'm not doing anything with it, just absorbing what's mine. Within, being able. Okay, without being able to channel an element to quickly refill his reserve, he had to be judicious in their use. He chuckled, anchoring himself and raising his shield. That wasn't a problem he had to deal with, and he'd had to deal with in a long time. Took the punch on it and coated his leg in earth for the added strength. He pushed, slamming it into the trees that made the walls. He grabbed the sword and pulled it out sideways before hurrying away. More bark landed on the ground and extra and extra was added as it stepped away from the wall. This time he could sense the life essence diminish as it healed. So this would be about attrition. He ducked under its swing as it rushed by, but wooden spike erupted from the arm and cut his back. He bit the pain and cut deep before moving away. He used his life essence to stop the bleeding. You're in it, aren't you, Furman? No. The wood fighter rushed him, the spikes extending the reach of its wild swing, making getting closer to it dangerous. Tib had been certain it was how it adapted so quickly. While he only had those creatures as experience, he talked with Omega runners over the years, and they'd confirmed that first floors were predictable. Came were predictable. That came with later floors. The spikes shattered on his shield, and Tibs hurried to cut the exposed wood. Even badly aimed in the rush, he cut nearly halfway through the arm, then moved away from the other, reaching for him. When it swung again, Tibs brought his sword up instead of raising its shield. Its speed provided the force needed, and the arm was cut off. Then Tibs had to step away when, instead of screaming in pain, the creature turned to grab him. Dungeon creatures didn't feel pain. He couldn't use that or anger to get them to make mistake. He stepped back as the wood fighter advanced, flaying its arm at him in what seemed like blind attacks. Blind attacks, plural. He raised his shield and spikes broke off. Like a blind attack. At least he shouldn't be able to anger them. The added cuts only seemed to make its attack more mindless. Then he cut the other arm off, and instead of continuing to attack, I don't need him because there's no one else there, the creature paused, looking at it, then the other. Even without feature on its face, Tibs thought he saw confusion. As he was trying to work through what was happening, it threw its arm wide, then fell to its side. Moss creeped over it, absorbing it. There was still essence in it. How had... Gave up? Furman asked. Tibs looked up. What? What did you expect me to do without fists to turn it into paste? Murkar replied angrily. Tibs stared. The form under the moss was deflating, though was the best word he could think of. That was Murkar? Yes, he replied petulantly. You beat me. Feeling proud of yourself? I didn't know you could possess a creature. I thought only the dungeon could do that. Ha! So you don't know everything. He ignored the barb in favor of sensing his injuries. He could heal them. The splint kept them from getting worse, but it would make the next fight difficult. But the run wasn't done. He headed for the door. As with everything else, it was made of wood, but here it had the look of rough lumber. The kind he'd find in houses built out of felled trees. It did have one thing out of place. The lock was metal. No intricacy to how it had been worked, but the mechanism within it was as complex as any lock on a well-secured door would be. He made picks and set to work. Does being able to sense it make it easier? Furman asked. I don't have to test by feel to know if I've set the pin, and I can tell which pins are tricked. Tricked pins? Some locks have pins notched, so it feels like they're set when they aren't. We learn to tell the difference of the feel, but it slows things down. The lock clicked and the door moved inward. Here, how long it takes isn't a problem, but when breaking into a house, any delay can lead to a guard walking in on me while working. The room was square, with tiles on the floor etched with the arcanus. In the far corner, a haggard-looking man looked up at Tibs. Stay where you are. Then, because of the confused expression, he repeated it in the local dialect. Every awl, ike, and tear were triggers. He easily stepped around them. Are you a spirit? The man asked fearfully as Tibs crouched before him. He had surprisingly few injuries, Mirka snorted. No, your woman sent me to take you home. He used earth to straighten himself and took the man in his arms. He looked at the door, then the wall to his left. The dungeon's exit was behind it. He looked up and mouthed, pleased. What happened? Mirka asked mockingly. Well, this doesn't need to be capitalized. We're not good enough to speak to anymore? He doesn't want the other to know he can talk with us, Furman said. That we can talk at all. Tibs nodded. Oh, then this is going to be fun? He nodded to the wall again. Tell me you aren't considering it, Mirka warned. He made it to the last room. He defeated the boss we set to protect it. He finished the run. He cheated! I want to see it make its way back with that in its arms. This isn't about what we want, Mirka. You told me that. I said the challenge. I get those who failed. Those who succeed get to leave. The wall opened and revealed the passage. The man in his arm whimpered as Tibs stepped into the forest and, to his surprise, into the morning light. And that concludes chapter 21 of Stepping Wild. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available for free on Royal Road. And if you want to read ahead of that and support me in the process, that is on Ream Story. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. The links are in the notes, and with that, I shall wish you a good day.